Now, as usual, I'll start this video out with a quick spoiler warning that if you haven't yet seen Chapter 7 of The Mandalorian and you don't want anything ruined, it's a really good time to click away. That said, this was yet another fantastic episode, right up there with the first three, and it was directed by Deborah Chow, who also directed the third episode and will be directing the Kenobi series that begins filming next year, which makes me even more excited for that than I already was, if possible. And, as expected, these last two episodes are basically going to amount to the season finale, where in order to guarantee the safety of the child, or Baby Yoda as most of the world calls him, the Mandalorian accepts a deal with Greef Karga to take out the Imperial that is in pursuit of the little fella. And so the episode turned into our Round Up the Posse episode, and in the end Baby Yoda gets taken, which sets up a final showdown next week. And that's a little backwards to how I thought it'd go. I thought Baby Yoda would be taken first, and then the Mandalorian would round up the posse, more the characters he'd encountered in the previous episodes. But I suppose it's pretty much all the same in the end, and Moff Gideon has or is about to get his hands on Baby Yoda. Well, we don't know why he wants Baby Yoda yet exactly. We just know he really does, as he even says in this episode. My guess, though, is that he's very much an Imperial loyalist and thinks the child is the key to bringing Palpatine back or healing him or something along those lines, who knows. Or maybe they want to find a way to not necessarily clone Baby Yoda, but to use him as a template to start cloning some sort of Force-sensitive super soldier that will help the Empire return to past glory. All I know is we were told the origins of the First Order would be explored in this series, and I'd be very surprised if this isn't part of that. Though I suppose Moff Gideon could want him for a more personal reason, and the way he talks about how he desperately wants him more than they could ever know, well, it makes it seem like that may be the case. And speaking of Moff Gideon, I do believe the identity of the mystery figure at the end of Episode 5 has been revealed, and for better or worse, it isn't Boba Fett. Rather, it's the cape-wearing Moff Gideon, and by the fact that he flies himself around in his own TIE fighter, and he already strikes me as the type who's not afraid to get his hands dirty, and again how badly he seems to want to get Baby Yoda, all that says to me he very well could be the type to go to Tatooine himself in pursuit of the child. Also, when we compare some pictures side by side, the cape looks about the right length, and the boots look very similar as well. I really do think this might be a case of them not meaning to hint at Boba Fett returning, and it just came off that way in large part thanks to the sound of the spurs, and that other little noise made when he first shows up at the end of the episode, the one that you can also hear when we see Boba Fett in A New Hope. And again, maybe someone in post-production added all that not knowing what it would allude to, or maybe they did and they wanted to mess with fans. Or perhaps these two are not one and the same and the mystery figure could still be Boba Fett. We didn't hear spurs when Moff Gideon was walking in this episode, so who knows. Oh, and for the record, whatever Imperial engineer designed the folding wings on a TIE fighter deserves a raise and or promotion or something. That's a feature that should have been implemented on them long ago, and one could kind of question why we don't see that upgrade made on the First Order TIE fighters. Not saying it's a plot hole or even a nitpick, I'm just curious. And maybe they just see it as an unnecessary added expense, and that TIE fighter pilots can just go ahead and climb their asses down. Or that keeping them upright saves a lot of space. There's also the possibility that, considering this is a former Moff's ship, that it could just be a custom job. Whatever the case, I thought it was cool. Moving on to Baby Yoda in this episode, we actually got to see him embrace or use the dark side a little bit when he started to choke Cara Dune during her arm wrestling match with the Mandalorian. And what's interesting here is we get to see just how much Baby Yoda does indeed care about the Mandalorian, and that he can be as dangerous and deadly as he is adorable. We also get to see him force heal in this episode, which is really the first time in the new canon, that I can think of anyway, that we see it used, or at least used to such an extreme extent where it can literally mend a horrible wound and neutralize poison. Though yes, force healing has been a thing in video games forever, and we also see it used plenty of times in the old expanded universe. What was a little odd about him using the Force, however, was just how clueless everyone else seemed to be as to what he was doing and how, though Kuiil seemed to know or guess what it was but just never got the chance to explain. And though I suppose I could see the Mandalorian being confused about the Force, or not really up to speed on it, if you will, I do find it a little strange that Cara Dune, the ex-Rebellion shock trooper, seemed so clueless. I mean, I'd imagine everyone in the Rebellion knew about Luke Skywalker and that he represented the return of the Jedi. Now, sure, not everyone in the Rebellion met or saw Luke in action, and maybe those who never did see him with their own two eyes thought what he could do was being exaggerated, that the stories about him and the Jedi of old were just meant to boost morale. But you'd really think it would have clicked in her head pretty quickly what Baby Yoda was doing. Then again, Maybe what she and the others were having trouble wrapping their minds around is the idea that such a young little one could actually use the Force like that. And speaking of all that, there's no doubt he's very gifted with the Force, and without any sort of training that we know of. Though I think obviously Yoda's species is just naturally gifted with the Force. I think we've thought that all along. But I really hope that this whole thing with Baby Yoda in general isn't being done to just help justify Rey and what she can do with a lack of training. Something tells me, though, that the new canon is really going to imply that training isn't so much needed to know how to use the Force, but rather how to use it right, or how to follow the right path. In other words, it's not hard to teach someone who is Force sensitive how to push or pull something, or even how to mind trick the weak-minded. That many can and do just kind of pick it up on their own easily enough. But being responsible with that power, not abusing it, avoiding the dark side, and understanding the Force as much as anyone can, and learning to follow its will is what Jedi training is really all about, which certainly does make sense. Though I'd still argue that lightsaber combat is, in large part, a skill that must be learned, especially when going against another Force user. Moving on then, there were also a lot of little things about this episode that I really enjoyed, one of them being that we pretty much learned that Jawas are everywhere across the galaxy, or at least in the Outer Rim. That was my takeaway anyway from Grief Karga warning them that there are Jawas all over the lava fields, and that the fact that we've seen them on, of course, Tatooine, as well as on Arvala 7, which was where we meet Kuiil the Ugnaught, to me it basically says that they spread out and pop up everywhere, which is an idea I like when you consider what Jawas are like. I also loved learning more about Kuiil, about his life as an Imperial slave, and how he earned his freedom with his own two hands, and that he had a little bit of animosity towards Cara Dune. They did such a great job with his character in such a short amount of screen time, and him trying to get back to the ship before the biker scouts caught up to him was tense, and his death hits you, or at least it hits me. I also liked what he said about droids, that they are neither good nor evil, and are instead a reflection of their master, though I gotta say I found training IG-11 to be a little odd. It's strange that Kuiil can put him back together again, but can't program him to do simple tasks like pick something up without crushing it. However, I do see where they're probably going with this, that IG-11 saw his new master gunned down, and will now learn to kill again. Yet he'll also want to save and protect Baby Yoda because that's what his now dead master was trying to do at the end. And other than all the Mandalorians showing up yet again, which would be awesome to see, but I think they're long gone by now, or coming up with a hell of a plan, IG-11 is pretty much the only way I see our heroes getting out of their current predicament, and something tells me he'll be a reoccurring character on the show afterwards, a droid for the Mandalorian, who of course hates droids, to somehow have to cope with and to learn to accept, eventually. And speaking of the other Mandalorians, seems like the Purge was simply an attempt by the Empire to take over Mandalore or to crush some sort of resistance or uprising while they were in control of it, because in the show Rebels, it seemed like they already pretty much did have control of Mandalore. So I'm guessing that Bo-Katan, who was given the Darksaber by Sabine in that show and basically became the leader of the Mandalorians, tried to free Mandalore or led the aforementioned resistance, and things went horribly, horribly wrong, and the Mandalorians were almost all wiped out. And all this talk about the Purge says to me that they're setting up eventually bringing in a character like Bo-Katan, or maybe Sabine as well, down the road, which would be awesome. It'd be awesome to see both of them in live action. And in theory, at least, neither one would even have to take off their helmets, so you'd only need Tia Sakar and Katie Sackhoff to come back for voice acting, though both, I believe, are normal actors as well. At least I know Katie Sackhoff is. She's been in a lot of things that I've seen, like Battlestar Galactica. Not to mention, she looks a lot like her character of Bo-Katan. Tia could also certainly pass for Sabine, but it might all be a moot point if the helmets never come off, even though both those characters used to take their helmets off all the time in other shows. I guess it really depends on if the no helmets off thing is something new, something they've gone back to perhaps, something just that particular Mandalorian clan does, or maybe something only foundlings must do. And considering the Mandalorian already said that he put his helmet on when he was very young, and no one has seen his face since, and all that would have happened before Rebels where Mandalorians were still taking their helmets off freely, my guess is it's either a thing his clan does or something foundlings have to do. Anyway, before this video turns into Mandalorian Cultural Speculation Hour, a fun video for another time perhaps, let me sum up this episode by saying again that I thought it was fantastic. Outside of Cara Dune seemingly not knowing about the Force and maybe the whole training of IG-11 thing, I don't have any complaints. This was action-packed and is again what I was hoping for out of this show going into it. Not to mention, it again looked great, was well acted and directed, and I can't wait for Chapter 8 next Friday. and to see where they take this show down the road. Because, as said before, I think it will increase in scope and scale as the seasons go on, and after what has been a rather small yet focused season on The Mandalorian as we get to know him better. I think that, yes, we'll learn more about the origins of the First Order, as we were told we would, but we'll also see a rebuilding or recovery of Mandalorians, and some way somehow the Mandalorian will be a part of that. But perhaps the most interesting and pressing question is what becomes of Baby Yoda. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're going to save him in next week's episode, but what happens to him after that? And just how much are we going to learn about why Moff Gideon wants him? Hopefully, I'll be discussing those answers in my review for next week's episode. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode and how you think the season finale will play out next Friday. Also, how much do you want to learn about Baby Yoda or his species? How much is too much, or do you want to know it all? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.